Common sand is one of the most familiar silicon compounds. Pure quartz sand is silicon dioxide.
The silicon chip is here at the center. It's about 125 microns thick.
And your guess was right?
It would seem so. Silicon-based.
Summation.
We are dealing with a silicon creature of the deep rocks.
Making experimental microelectronic circuits is an intricate process. It begins when an ingot of pure silicon is sliced into wafers by a thin, high-speed diamond saw.
All that power exists in silicon crystal, this man-made ingot, whose basic ingredient is found in ordinary sand, next to oxygen, the most common ingredient on Earth.
Microchips operate successfully because the electrical properties of semiconductors, such as silicon, may be affected by introducing very small amounts of impurities.
The mushrooming industry gives birth to a new high-tech cult and a place called Silicon Valley.
So Sean's idea was to leave the silicon dioxide, which was a very good insulator on top of the transistor when it was being diffused. Just leave it there. It was good insulator.
We're going to begin a special two-part look today at the slowdown in the Silicon Valley. And on today's program, we're going to meet a venture capitalist, an industry analyst, a Silicon Valley business correspondent.
The tiny gizmo in question is, of course, the silicon chip. Making these extraordinary miniature electronic brains is one of the most complex manufacturing tasks ever attempted.
The digital revolution changed all that. Silicon replaced silver, pixels replaced grains.
The modern photovoltaic cell consists primarily of silicon atoms. An atom of silicon has 14 protons.
The spark that ignited Silicon Valley's explosive growth can be traced back to a dispute that occurred in this building at 391 San Antonio Road, Mountain View.
Jean Erny developed the planar process, covering a silicon wafer with oxide and forming the transistor underneath the protective layer.
A chip is an extremely small silicon plate, ranging from a couple to several dozen square millimeters in size.
The Silicon Valley has had a tradition, starting with Hewlett and Packard, etc., of building fundamentally new technologies.
The silicon disk is spin-coated with a photosensitive resist.
That morning, the future Silicon Valley was just a speck on the map.
And they're made of? They're made out of silicon, but modified to turn it into essentially a metallic material.
Pure silicon is a semiconductor, which means it conducts electric current better than insulators, but not as well as metals. And this is because an atom of silicon has 4 electrons in its outermost or valence shell.
Know it all. Most people know Silicon from the valley in California that bears its name, the birthplace of modern computing, where technological dreams became reality, where brilliant 20-somethings became millionaires.
Transistors are made of semiconductors such as silicon. Each silicon atom is bonded with 4 neighboring silicon atoms.
Today, its computing power could be contained on a silicon chip no larger than a grain of sand, and that's thanks to the transistor. A modern phone has around 2 billion transistors.
Why exactly does silicon seem to be so universally used for electronics instead of some other material like copper, graphite, or potato? Well, silicon has a number of properties that make it unusual.
On the silicon, we have a silicon layer, which is basically insulator. Parts of it get diffused with impurities such as boron to become conducting.
Researchers predict that the lower limit for silicon gates could be 5 nanometers, and by 2021 it won't be economically efficient to keep shrinking our transistors.
Silicon is a semiconductor, and its main applications fall into 3 categories.
Graphene does not have a band gap like silicon or germanium or gallium arsenide.
And we have a project that's called Uncovering the Silicon. In this project, what we're doing is taking a very simple, old integrated circuit. We're going to walk you through the entire process of understanding
to slightly less giant computers made of silicon. And ever since, they've kept getting smaller.
Sand is primarily made up of silicon dioxide, or silica. Silicon is the second most abundant element in the Earth's crust.
Silicon. Not only is silicon chemically similar to carbon, it also makes it on the list of the most plentiful chemicals found in the universe.
Because today is the day we're announcing that the Mac is transitioning to our own Apple Silicon.
I don't think we can review the new Apple Silicon versions of these Macs like normal computers anymore, or at least I don't think we can make the direct on-paper comparisons.
However, there's another material known as a semiconductor. Silicon is an example of a semiconductor.
The company brought its first silicon transistor to market in 1958, a single component that would put the silicon into Silicon Valley decades later down the line.
Which itself is a carefully crafted piece of metal and silicon that contains billions of tiny transistors, or on-off switches that represent ones and zeros.
What if I told you Apple Silicon has a hidden superpower? You can run native Linux on any M1 Mac. But wait,